Meanwhile, authorities in Cuba have blocked access to social media sites in an effort to quell the island's largest protests in decades. In a televised address, President Miguel Diaz-Canel denounced the protesters as counter-revolutionaries, blaming Cuba's problems on the long-standing U.S. embargo and accusing American imperialists of stoking tensions on social media. President Biden says the Cuban people are bravely asserting fundamental and universal rights and called on the regime to hear their people and serve their needs at this vital moment. Meanwhile, Cubans are facing a major shortage of food and fuel that experts warn could turn into an urgent humanitarian crisis. Michael Bustamante is a Latin American history professor at Florida International University and author of Cuban Memory Wars, Retrospective Politics in Revolution and Exile, and he joins me now for more on this. Michael, we've heard these protests described as unprecedented. So what makes them so unique and why now?
Hi, it's good to be with you. Simply put, we haven't seen anything like this in 60 years. The last time that there was anything remotely like this, you'd have to go back to 1994, when Cuba, sort of in the depths of its economic crisis at that time, after the fall of the Soviet Union, did see some sort of spontaneous demonstrations on the streets, but only in Havana. And what happened on Sunday was remarkable because it didn't begin in Havana. And it spread to a number of towns and cities across the island. So really the scale of the demonstrations is simply unprecedented.
And President Miguel Diaz-Canel spoke for 4 hours yesterday, condemning the protests. He seems to be offering no signs of backing down here. So where does this all go from here?
It's really hard to say. I was very distressed with the way the Cuban authorities responded to the demonstrations on Sunday, calling their own loyalists out to the streets to combat was the word that was used, protesters on the streets, rather than seeking to de-escalate or demonstrating a willingness to listen to the demands of Cuban citizens that seemed to egg it on. Yesterday's long press conference seemed to be an attempt to kind of ratchet down the temperature a little bit, provide a detailed explanation about some of the ways in which U.S. sanctions do, in reality, make economic life on the island quite difficult. But simply put, blaming the United States, U.S. sanctions for everything that is happening in Cuba right now is inaccurate, and it seems pretty clear that for the citizens on the streets on Sunday, that's just not going to work. So where this goes from here, I think I'll just be watching to see whether the protests continue or whether the security sort of display that we've seen successfully, quashes them for the moment.
And so, Michael, you say blaming this all on U.S. sanctions is not accurate, but is there any validity to saying that U.S. sanctions are making this more difficult for Cuba?
The United States has had a program of comprehensive sanctions in place on Cuba for 6 decades, with greater or lesser intensity over the years, depending on the administration. I think we have to acknowledge that those sanctions do, make things more difficult for the Cuban economy. They affect Cuba's ability to do international banking. On the other hand, Cuba can still trade with other countries around the world. And so, this is not an either-or scenario. What I would say is that, not offering some channels of relief, cutting off the ability of Cubans in the United States to send their family members remittances during the pandemic, which has been an economic crisis in Cuba in and of itself, that does have real effects on the Cuban people. But of course, the Cuban state has also taken some decisions, for example, a partial re-dollarization of the economy, that have really hurt the Cuban people. And so they have some responsibility to bear, certainly a lot of responsibility for just how dire this situation has gotten.
Many Cuban Americans are now calling for the U.S. to take action. What do they want the U.S. to do?
I'm not sure. Neither the Cuban people nor the Cuban American community speak with one voice. What I can say is that, I have heard on one sort of extreme some calls for, things as dramatic as U.S. military intervention of one kind or another. That's not necessarily a representative opinion of the majority in the Cuban American community, but it is a strain of opinion that I think is very dangerous. The last thing that we should be doing if you want to support the right of protesters to be heard by the government is to propose something that will feed into the government's narrative that this is simply a kind of a plot that's cooked up outside of the United States in Washington or in Miami. Those calls are irresponsible. They're dangerous. And the smartest voices in Cuban civil society have been saying so. So I hope that those in the Cuban American community who are making those calls will listen to some reasoning here.
And we've heard experts warning that intervention could actually exacerbate an already urgent humanitarian situation there. Why is that?
The situation is urgent. Something needs to give. Cuba's economy has been hurt dramatically by COVID. It's an economy that's linked to tourism in a very important way. Cuba is going through its worst sort of moment of the COVID crisis itself in terms of the disease, after having been able to control it pretty well through the end of last year. I would say that some kind of outside help is needed. Cuban Americans, for example, many are trying to figure out ways to get medicines, foods that are in short supply. So I think U.S. policy changes that can actually help facilitate some of that humanitarian aid and show the United States as being a friendly face to the Cuban people rather than antagonist. Those are not moves that are in contradiction with the demand of the protesters. I would say rather that they actually are consistent with them.
All right, Michael Bustamante, great to have you today. Thank you for taking the time.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.